I will now pass you over to the past mayor, who will be receiving the flame when it arrives from the Rotary Club of Cardiff. We must thank Ganage for bringing it from Cardiff. Thank you.
The Mayor sends her apologies, and unfortunately she's not too well today. So you've got me, I'm afraid. I'm sort of very much last year's model. No bling, I'm afraid, but it's a great privilege to be here and to accept this flame on its journey, which I understand has probably already been halfway around the world and is going off the other half shortly afterwards. Absolutely fantastic, the cause that it's for, to eradicate polio in the world. I understand that you've already done that in India, and you've raised 56 and umpteen zeros after money already, so that's absolutely fantastic, and more power to you, etc. And if we can do this with other things as well, I think we will make a better world. I'm not going to say too much because I know everybody else here wants to say something. So thank you for inviting me, and well done, and let's hope it doesn't get blown out. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, Councillor Lee, honoured guests, and my fellow Rotarians, good evening. Now, I've been asked to give a brief account of the latest situation in the world with reference to the eradication of this dreadful disease, poliomyelitis, which we now call the end game. Rotarians amongst you will probably know that in the early 80s, Rotary did a pilot programme in the Philippines, vaccinating all the children there against polio. This programme was so successful that Rotary International, together with the Rotary Foundation, our charity, promised the Rotarians would vaccinate every child in the world. We made that promise in 1985, and WHO, UNICEF, and the US Centre for Disease Control were so impressed that they said in 1987 that together we will eradicate the scourge of polio from the face of the earth. And thus, the Polio Plus programme was started. We are now in a situation more than 28 years later, after an amazing amount of work, when we can see the end in sight. We in Rotary have been the driving force in this programme, but as I mentioned, we have had a number of partners. We could not have done this job alone. As well as those stated above, we have had tremendous help from many governments of the world, including our own. And you may be surprised to know that the government of the United Kingdom has given as much money as the whole of Rotary over those years. Almost the most important, though, is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which has already given us over $1 billion and continues to match our contributions 2 to 1, thus tripling the investment. There are, as I'm sure you know, only 3 endemic countries left in the world: Nigeria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. The entire continent of Africa, as of this morning, has had no cases of polio for over 8 months. Now, the Rotarians amongst you will know what a tremendous achievement that is. We really never thought we'd get polio out of Nigeria. It really was a hotbed not so long ago. Afghanistan has only had 1 case this year, and that was in January. Nothing for 2 months. Pakistan, which will probably be the last country to be declared polio-free, has only had 20 cases this year, as opposed to 36 at this time last year. This is going to be our biggest problem in finishing the case. But we are getting there. They are at last turning the corner. The current vaccine in use is trivalent. This is just a little bit of medical, but it's not too technical. i.e. it has 3 strains of altered virus, type 1, 2 and 3, matching the 3 types of polio. We have had no type 2 polio anywhere in the world since 1999, and no type 3 polio for 2 years. So the vaccine is being changed worldwide in April next year to a bivalent one, i.e. 2 strains. Type 2 is being removed as it can, on rare occasions, mutate and so cause vaccine-derived polio. Arguably acceptable when we had 3,000 cases every week or even more, but totally unacceptable now we have so very few cases. This change is called the switch, of which you may hear more in the future. For added protection during the switch, 1 dose of injectable vaccine, which cannot mutate, is now being given with the 3rd dose of oral vaccine. Following the world being declared polio-free, I'll get that right in a minute, polio-free for 3 years, the oral vaccination will cease to be given at all, and only the injectable will be used worldwide, as in Western countries at the moment. We are so very close to completing this enormous task. We have done so much and should be justly proud of our achievements. But we are not finished yet. We need continued support for just a little while longer. It's been a hard path to walk, but the end is in sight. And when it's finished, the legacy we leave the world will be absolutely immeasurable. Only once before in the history of this world has an illness been eradicated, and that was smallpox. So just think what we have done to almost get rid of polio. This flame, as it travels the world, is celebrating that success and also publicising the ongoing commitment of all those taking part in this fantastic story of Rotarians making a difference. Thank you.
Mr. President, Councillor Lilly, and Rotarians. In October 1948, I was 13, and I was off school. It was always nice to be off school, but I had a raging temperature, and I was in bed. And I was very rarely in bed as a child, and I can remember it so well. I knew I was ill because my mother lit the fire. All our bedrooms had fires in, and you only ever had them lit if you were ill. My parents used to have a fire in their bedroom and read, because no television. They used to sit and read by their fire in the evening, but as we children never had it. And so I was obviously pretty ill, and we never had the doctor to the house unless you were ill. And so the doctor was summoned, and he was Dr. Main. He was known as the young doctor. And then Dr. Love was above him. He didn't come. And Dr. Main was very wise, and he said, I'm not sure what all this is, but I think she should go to the isolation hospital. So I was taken to the isolation hospital. Now, many of you don't even know where that was. It was at the top of Brosnocker Hill, and now I'm told it's Wessex Water. I was taken into the hospital, and all I can remember was being put in a room that was surrounded by glass. And from then on, I couldn't see, or I could see my parents outside. There were no visitors, and I was in bed. And I know I couldn't move, I couldn't lift my head, and I wasn't very hungry, and I can remember them coming with a sort of looked like a teapot that you drank liquid from. And I'd no idea what was wrong with me. I just knew I wasn't well. Nobody told me. And the nurse came in and I said, "What's wrong with me?" And they said, having looked at the end of the bed on the chart, they said, "You've got infantile paralysis." And I didn't know what infantile paralysis was. It was later called polio. And after a time when I was better, I was moved to the Bath and Wessex orthopaedic. And I was there the other day my mother started the Friends of the hospital many, many years ago, and I went then to open the coffee shop, and when Mum opened the Friends of the RUH, it was all the consultants' wives who, Mummy was very concerned that there weren't any curtains around the beds, and so Mum raised money for that, and now there are 400 volunteers, and of course it's all one big hospital now. I was in a ward that had one side open because I was in a ward with TB patients, and TB patients needed fresh air, and polio patients need warm. And it was so cold that we had a mug by our beds with water in and a toothbrush, and in the morning when I woke up, the toothbrush was actually frozen in the water. I remember that. And as I got better, we had physiotherapy, and the only thing was we had school, which was extremely annoying because I thought the one thing I wanted to do was miss school. The specialist in those days was Miss Forrester Brown, and she was a small, frightening woman, but she was the expert in polio. And I noticed when I went back to the hospital that there is a lovely plaque there. Everything was different. We had a matron, bring back matron. She was in charge. It was absolutely wonderful. You knew where you were. You know, in the morning she'd come round, all the nurses would stand in a row. You had someone to say things were good or complain. There were metal beds. We had a frame over our legs, or I did, because I had polio down the left side, and I was immensely fortunate to get my movement back. I've got a curvature of the spine, which every doctor I've ever seen, when I've taken off my clothes, he looks at me and says, "You're going to have trouble with that back." And I have been immensely lucky that I haven't had, even though I look a bit funny. And also I have a left hand, which when I'm doing television, everybody writes to me with cures for it, all thinking I've got arthritis. And the bonus is I don't mend socks. It was very cold, and every day, as the weather got warmer, our beds were moved out onto what looks like concrete. They used to call it solarium. And all the beds were put out, whether you were TB or polio, and it was very cold. There were no toys, nothing to do but school. I was very fortunate, and some of the others too, to be taken to the hot baths in Bath, because if you're lying flat, as I wasn't walking then, you would be taken by ambulance to the hot baths, put in the water with all those minerals. You could stand up, and I can remember the first time I stood up in water, I was sick, because your body isn't used to being stood up. And I enjoyed those outings. The visiting hours were quite different in those days, because the intake of the orthopaedic hospital was from all over Somerset quite fairly. They were only 2 times a month, and you would only have 2 people at one go, because people had to come in and buses and so forth. It was right. And also, there was a slip of paper that was sent to all parents or visitors, and they were allowed to bring in eggs, butter and biscuits, but it was to be handed in to the staff ward sister. Don't know what happened to it after that. But I was very lucky to have a father who could find ways round things, and he knew that I was out on the solarium every day in this cold to give me fresh air. And he walked from South Lawn, which is on Lansdowne, with my pony, and brought it, I think it would be about 3 miles walking, so that I could see my pony. And I must say, I cheered up from that day. I was immensely fortunate, and I was very, very looked after. But I thank Rotary for all they've done all over the world, and I think it is, having had polio, I think it is absolutely amazing to think that it is almost eradicated, and I think you should be congratulated.
Thank you, Mr. President. Past Mayor, District Governor Judy, Mary and President Allen, special guests, ladies and gentlemen. President Allen has already mentioned Paul, but I couldn't start discussing where the flame has come from or where the flame is going without mentioning Paul Perry. Paul has a long-time friend in the Rotary Club of Chennai, Madras, and going back through round table days, so many, many years. And Paul received communication from Madras asking if we in Bath would be interested in hosting this flame that was going to travel around the world. And Paul spoke to me, and well, here we go. Starting in Madras on the 14th of December, the flame travelled to Colombo in Sri Lanka, passed back through India to Pakistan, through the Khyber Pass and into Afghanistan, passing through some of the most troubled and dangerous parts of the world by hand, and onwards to Sydney, Australia. Here it moved around a few Australian clubs before travelling to Taipei in Taiwan. And that's the home of the Rotary President of Rotary International. His name is President Gary Huang. The flame then moved to Manila in the Philippines, onwards to see the pyramids in Cairo, and on to us in the UK. It was delivered to the Rotary Club of Cambridge for their lunch meeting on the 24th. The AG, the Assistant Governor of District 10 Seventry, collected the flame, and he visited the Rotary Clubs of St Neots, Rushton, Wellingborough, all during the evening, with 11 other clubs in attendance, before taking it to Northampton for breakfast the next morning. You keeping up? Northampton delivered the flame onto the Rotary Club of Coventry Phoenix, and they had already invited 4 other Coventry clubs to their meeting. And at this meeting, our IBI president was also present. So the flame so far had had a good hearing. Coventry Phoenix took the flame on to Ulster, Rotary Club of Ulster, which is the home of our IBI, and onwards to the Rotary Club of Gloucester for their Friday lunch. Gloucester Club is in District 1100, our neighbour district, and they were holding a district conference at the weekend. So they had the flame taken from the Rotary Club of Gloucester back up to Warwick University, where they were hosting the district conference for the weekend. And from that conference, or at that conference, was a lady Rotarian who was a speaker, a guest speaker, and she was a member, or is a member, of Cardiff Bay Rotary Club. So she agreed to take the flame from Warwick University from the district conference to the Cardiff Club, and the Rotary Club of Cardiff last night had the most spectacular evening, to which our Rotarian friend Ganesh, who is not a member of the Rotary Club of Cardiff but of Merthyr Tydfil, and Ganesh was invited to the club, and Ganesh has kindly brought the flame across from Cardiff to us for our event this evening. Tomorrow, President Allen and I will take the flame onto Rotary Club of Exe Valley at Tiverton, and who in turn they will deliver it to Langport and Somerton on Thursday. It was intended to go on to Norton Radstock on Friday when we were initially making the plans, forgetting that Friday was Good Friday and the Rotary Club of Norton Radstock weren't meeting. So the flame, as far as we're concerned, as our organisation in the UK, ends with Langport and Somerton. But we then have to move it on further around the world. So we will dispatch it at the end of this week on to Lagos in Nigeria, en route to Canada, Chicago, the home of Rotary, and on to Sao Paulo in Brazil. And this is going to be handed back to Rotary President Gary Hoang at the Rotary International Convention in the middle of June in Sao Paulo, and then completing its global circumnavigation. I think you'll agree, a true celebration of the eradication of polio in India. Thank you.
Thank you once again, David, for all your hard work in seeing it in this part of the UK. Thank you. That ends the first part of the evening.